Assalamu alaikum dear viewers and dear students. In today's video we will discuss about the Cold War. What is Cold War and what do we mean by the term Cold War in international relations, and how this war started, what were some of the major phases, what were some of its ideological foundations, when did it particularly start. All these things we will be discussing, and then we will conclude it by how this war came to an end, and afterwards I will try to draw a picture of the world in the post-Cold War era, and as I have a series of documentaries available with you, a series of videos rather available with you, which describes the events which are unfolding now at the world stage in shape of the new Cold War between the United States of America and the rising China. But this Cold War, we will talk about the rivalry between the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, or in short USSR, or the Soviet Union. This is what we call. So first of all, in order to proceed, we need to think about this term Cold War and what is Cold War. So this is a term used to describe the relationships between the United States of America and the Soviet Union from 1945 up till 1980s, or you might call up till 1990. In this, neither side fought with each other, because that could be that could have disastrous consequences for both these countries and the whole world. So they never fought with each other directly, but they had their spheres of influence in which different small countries were either on part of the USA or on part of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was trying to expand. So it was a struggle to arrest the expansionist Soviet Union, or the spread of Soviet Union, or the expansion of Soviet Union on part of the United States of America. So they fought on others' territory. They did not fight on each other's territory, but on a third country's territories, or third countries' territories. So they fought on others' territories, but primarily it was a struggle between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. So this is how this is what we call the Cold War. Now the competition between the superpower influenced the foreign policies, political institutions and economic systems of societies in almost every corner of the world. So this was a competition between these two superpowers, and it influenced foreign policies, political institutions and the economic systems in almost all parts of the world. So no place in the world was spared from this conflict. Small nations had to choose sides. It was like this. What are some of its historical or intellectual paradigms of this Cold War? In the global political economy, I have discussed some of the approaches towards the political economy. So now again, just recall that discussion of global political economy. So I was talking about Adam Smith. So Adam Smith, the capitalist world led by the United States of America and its allies were rallying behind the United States of America. They were inspired by the ideology, the economic ideology of Adam Smith, which is known as capitalism. While on the other side, the communist countries, or the Soviet Union and its satellites, they were inspired by the economic ideologies of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, which is known as socialism or communism. At times it is also called Marxism. So they were inspired by this. Now, what is communism? For those who are my students, I have discussed Marxism or communism in depth in the classroom, but again, for their in order for them to refresh this idea of communism. So let me elaborate it further, and for the general viewers it will also be helpful. Those who are not my direct student, but they take keen interest in understanding different phenomena related to the international relations or global political economy. So that will also be helpful for them. So that is why we need to go into discussion about it. So communism was based on the 1848 publications of Communist Manifesto by these two German scholars, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. So it was based on their ideologies. Karl Marx was born in 1818 and died in 1883, and Engels was born in 1820 and died in 1885. So they were almost of the same age and in the same era, and they had these ideologies, or they presented this Communist Manifesto in which they presented their economic ideology. Now, what is it? It is an economic and social system in which all or nearly all property and resources are collectively owned by classes or a class society and not by the individual citizens. So this is what we call communism, commune. Everything is owned by the commune, by classes or by the society, and not by private citizens. This is the basic idea of communism, or the core idea of communism, that everything belongs to the community. It is not something which belongs to a private individual or private citizens. And what are some of the punchlines from that Communist Manifesto? So let me read it from here from my screen. The punchline of communism or Marxism or socialism. So you will understand that what was going on in Soviet Union and why the capitalist world was quite worried about the expansion of Soviet Union, and they wanted to arrest it. So it says that let the ruling classes tremble at the communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose, like the working class have nothing, or the working classes or the workers have nothing to lose but their chains. Like if they struggle against the capitalist, they will have nothing to lose, but they will only lose their chains in which they are yoked in slavery. So they will lose their chain, like they will get their freedom if they struggle, but if they do not, they will have to remain in the slavery of the capitalist or the industrialist class. They have a world to win, like these workers. They have a world to win if they struggle. This is basically between the lines. You need to read it. If they struggle for a revolution, they have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. So they are appealing to the working men of all countries, because the focus of communism or socialism or Marxism is on the class struggle. It is not something related to the nation state, to the notion of the nation state. It is related to the class struggle. So that is why they are say working men of all countries. They do not say that working men of a particular country, but all countries, because they are aligning themselves with the working classes across borders. So this was their ideology, and that was why that the West was quite worried about the spread of this socialism or capitalism or communism under the Soviet Union. What do capitalists believe? Markets, they believe that markets are efficient and should thus function without interference, and the role of the state is to regulate and protect. Like the state should not own the market, it should just play the role of a regulator of the market, and markets work efficiently and they should function without any sort of interference by the state. So the market forces are out there and they make their way. So that is why that was their ideology. So just imagine that when the other ideology which I just elaborated, the Marxist ideology, if that ideology takes over the whole world, then what will happen? these private owners or private citizens who own properties, industries, they will be deprived of their industries, their properties, because then these industries, these properties, they will belong to the commune. So that was a point of worry for them, for the capitalist countries, and that was why they united against this ideology. Now, Adam Smith has elaborated all these ideas on which the modern capitalism has been based in his book titled as The Wealth of Nation. That is the short title, but the complete title of this book, and this work was published in 1776. So in the complete title is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nation. The nature and causes of the wealth of nation, and inquiry into those nature and causes. So that was Adam Smith. And the capitalist world, the ideological foundation were based on Adam Smith's ideology, economic ideology or economic modules, and the other was based on Karl Marx's and Friedrich Engel's ideas or ideals, the capitalist. Now, what were some of the differences between the Soviet Union and the United States of America? This is just a lens, and we will have to look towards all the aspects of it. And this lecture might, I would not be able to complete this whole debate of Cold War in one lecture, but I will at least try to complete it in 2 lectures and not allow it to be stretched over 3 or more than 2 lectures. So this is what I will try, and let's see what happens. But this is a very important topic of international relations, so we need to understand it, and that is why the number of lectures shouldn't matter. But the point is that we should understand this Cold War. So America, the concept of free and fair election is there in the United States of America, but on the other side, in the Soviet Union, no elections were there, or it was a fixed kind of a system ruled by the Communist Party. Then in America, the system is based on democratic ideals. Since election is there, so democratic ideals is there, like people should have the right to select or elect their leader, their president or the chief executive, in other words. While in Soviet Union, what was the main idea? It was autocratic and it was dictatorship, like the party dictatorship was there, and then definitely whoever is ruling the country, the party is also ruled by that person, so his ideals are like, individual dictatorship is also there, but mainly we mean by dictatorship in terms of party dictatorship in the communist countries. Then the economic ideology, as I have already elaborated, capitalism or the capitalist ideology economic module was there in the United States of America, and on the other side, the economic ideology of the the Soviet Union was communism or socialism. Communism is driven from socialism, so it is a variant of socialism, but the ideology which ruled, which inspired this communism was basically socialism or Marxism. Now, what happens in the capitalist countries? It is like the Darwin theory, survival of the fittest. Whoever is the fittest will survive in the market and will capture all the resources or maximum resources in a country, and then can even develop a monopoly in the market. But on the other side, in the communist country, it was, everybody should help everyone else. So it was like this, that survival of the fittest was not the norm of the day. It was like everybody is earning and the state is collecting, and then the state is spending on all with equality. So it was like this. Then the United States of America was a comparatively rich country, quite rich country as compared to the Soviet Union, while on the other side, the Soviet Union economic base was not that strong. So it was formerly an agrarian society, and then it had to transform itself into an industrial society. So the economic base was not that strong, or the base of Soviet Union was not that strong. Then again, another contrast between the two countries was that freedom or personal freedoms were there in the United States of America, like freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of press, liberty, democracy. All these freedoms were there. Human rights violations were not that much rampant over there. But on the other side, the society in the Soviet Union was controlled by the secret police. And they say that the secret police used to, even each household, even it is said that by some scholars, that each household was having at least one agent of the secret police from among themselves. So I don't know whether that is a true statement or that is an exaggerated statement, but it shows the level of police control or the level of secret police control over the lives of the ordinary people in the Soviet Union. But it wasn't the case in the United States of America. Then in the Soviet Union, it was censorship. Media was not free. Things used to be filtered, and then they would come out for the masses in the open. Whatever the rulers would decide that this news should go out, that news would go out. Otherwise, they would censor everything. While on the other side, freedom of media was there in the United States of America, and people used to definitely, as I said, express their views, and then people would listen to diverse views through media. So the exposure of the people in the United States of America was far more than the exposure of the people in the Soviet Union. Then now let's go to the genesis of this ideological difference between the two. I have already elaborated this in my regular classes, but let me go briefly about it. Like the Bolshevik or the first socialist movement in 1919 overthrew the existing Russian government of the Tsar over there. And then in 1922, it began the formation of the Soviet Union or the USSR. So that formation began in 1922, and it was the interwar period. Like the First World War had just come to an end, and now this thing is happening in Europe. Then the capitalist United States refused to recognize the Soviet Union until 1933. So the United States of America refused to formally accept the status of or recognize the Soviet Union, but later on it had to in 1933. It then accepted it or recognized it. And then the seeds of hostilities between the two systems, between the two countries, they were sown at the end of the First World War, because a different system, economic system was launched. A revolution came, and that was an altogether different system. And the United States of America, Great Britain, they were capitalist economies. So this seed was sown over there at the end of the First World War. And then the United States of America would call Soviet Union as a devil incarnate, and likewise Soviet Union would call the United States of America as a devil incarnate. So it was like this. Then what happened is that in the Second World War, now this is very interesting. In the Second World War, since they had a common enemy, the Nazi Germany and the fascist Italy, so they had to fight on the same side against the Axis powers. The Axis powers are Italy and Japan and the Germany. So they had to fight against the Axis power because from the Soviet Union, on the one side there is Japan, and it as I have already mentioned in one of my previous talks, that the 1905 Japanese-Russian war, it was a big defeat for the Russia, and for the first time a European nation had been defeated by an Asian nation. But now this Asian nation is on the sides of the fascists, So Soviet Union had to face Japan on the one side, and then on the other side it had to face Germany. So then it was logical for Soviet Union to side with the United States of America in that war, despite the fact that they had ideological differences with each other. But they sided with each other. They cooperated in that war with each other. So that can be called as a friendship between the two states, but that was quite brief, that friendship. And some analysts even say that that wasn't a friendship, that was a marriage of convenience for them. And when the common enemy was eliminated, or the common threat was eliminated, so then that friendship also dissolved. So this was about it. Then what are some of the causes of the Cold War? So the end of the World War II and the changes in the balance of power. When the World War II ended, then there was a change in the balance of power, because previously it was the United States of America and Great Britain, and on the other side it was Germany and Japan. But now all those excess powers, they have been eliminated, and France was on the side of the Allies. But now there is a change of the balance. Now Soviet Union has emerged. So this change in the balance of power was there, and these changes it was difficult for them to adjust to these these new realities, or the new normals. So it was like this. Then another task was there to rebuild the Europe. So the rebuilding of Europe was also a task, and that task was successfully accomplished by the United States of America, but not completely, or it could not rebuild the whole of Europe, because parts of Europe had been in the influence of USSR as well. Then the United States of America, the President Harry Truman, he gave his Truman Doctrine, and it was a European recovery program. And under the Truman Doctrine, then this Marshall Plan came, and in the Marshall Plan it was $13 billion economic package for the reconstruction of Europe. And if you translate this amount, this $13 billion in current time, keeping in view the level of inflation all over the world, so it is roughly saying it is about 130 to 50 billion dollars in current time. So it was a huge package given to Europe at that time by the United States of America for its construction. The value of that $13 billion in current time is about 130 to 150 billion dollars. So that is a huge amount. Soviet Union, as I have already said, it occupied Eastern Europe, and then the famous phrase of Winston Churchill, that an iron curtain has descended upon the continent, over the continent. So it was the Iron Curtain, like those areas which became part of the Soviet Union are now cut off from the capitalist countries all across the Europe, and this curtain was almost in the middle of the Europe. And I will explain how it was in the middle of the Europe. You need to keep in mind that Germany was divided between the successful or the Allied powers, and since Soviet Union was part of the Allied powers in the Second World War, so that was why it had to get part of Germany as well. So even that Germany was divided between West and East Germany, and this is also very interesting. We will discuss that in detail in a bit. Now, what were the major leaders of during the Second World War and then during the Cold War? So Joseph Stalin was leading Russia, Russia is a wrong term. We should use, whenever we refer to the Cold War time or the communist Russia, so we should not call it Russia then. We should call it Soviet Union, because that was Soviet Union. So Joseph Stalin was leading the Soviet Union or the USSR, and then this Winston Churchill was leading the Great Britain, and Franklin D. Roosevelt was the President of the United States of America during the war, but then he died and Harry Truman had to take over. So that was why Harry Truman then gave his reconstruction plan for the Europe. Then there were at the end of the Second World War, when Germany was on the when Germany was on the decline, its power was on the decline, and it was almost obvious that it will be defeated now. So what happened, that these three leaders, they came together, they sit together, and they in a series of conferences, the Tehran conference, the Yalta conference, the Potsdam conference, and over there they decided a lot of issues about the future of Europe and Germany, and who will take which part and which part will come under whose dominance. So issues like that. But you need to keep one thing in mind, that Europe, that since Russia was fighting Germany, and it was a European power as well, not Russia, Soviet Union was fighting Germany, and it was a European power. So it had to deploy its troops in the middle, in the heart of the Europe, against Germany. On the other side, the United States of America had to cross all the Atlantic Ocean and come to all the way from the United States of America to Europe. So it wasn't feasible for the United States of America to keep its troops deployed in Europe for quite some time, and it had to go back after the war. So that was also one of the dynamics, that Soviet Union was expanding, and it was bringing many Eastern European and Central European countries into its fold, and then it was subversive activities were there, and revolutions were orchestrated in those countries. So that was why those countries became part of the Soviet Union, or became allies of the Soviet Union, and became satellites of the Soviet Union. You might call it like this. Now, what are some of the leaders of the Cold War, during the Cold War? It is also very interesting. You need to, for your understanding, you need to keep the minds of, the names of these leaders in your mind. Number one, in the United States of America, it was Roosevelt, then it was Truman from 45 till 1953. It was Truman, 1953 to 1961, it was Eisenhower. 1961 to 1963, it was John F. Kennedy. Then it was Johnson after the assassination of Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson, I guess his exact name is Lyndon Johnson. So then you just need to confirm it, but I think that was Lyndon Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. So Johnson was the President of the United States of America, and then it was Richard Nixon from 1969 to 1974, and then it was Ford from 1974 to 1977, and then it was Jimmy Carter from 1977 to 1981, and then from 1981 to 1989 it was Reagan, President Reagan of the Ronald Reagan of the United States of America, and then from 1989 up till 1990. Up till the end of the Cold War, it was George Bush, Senior Bush, not George W. Bush. He was his son, who was elected in the year 2000. So it was the Senior Bush, and this Senior Bush remained President of the United States of America for 2 terms, for 8 consecutive years. He also remained the president, and then Clinton. And so, but we are only concerned with the era of the Cold War. So that is why we need not to go into detail about the presidents who came after Senior Bush. And sorry, what was the leadership structure in Soviet Union at that time? So from 1920s till 1953, it was Stalin. When he died, it was then Nikita Khrushchev or Khrushchev, right? So then after that it was Brezhnev, and after Brezhnev it was Mikhail Gorbachev, and after Gorbachev in 1991 it was Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russia then, but then it was Boris Yeltsin. On the other side, there was China, and there was a communist revolution in China as well in 1945. So who was ruling China? Mao Zedong till 1976. He not only led the whole revolutionary movement, but later on he became the president of China, and he led China up till 1976, and after 1976 it was Deng Xiaoping. So this was the Chinese leadership structure, and these are some of the names, very important names, and you need to remember these names. It might be part of your quizzes, and it might be part of your examination, and if you refer to these names, so it will really have good impression on your examiner if you are an aspirant of the competitive examination. So these names should be on your fingertips, so that you can make good use of it during your interview, make good use of it during your current affair papers and the international relation papers as well. So it was like Joseph Stalin, as I have mentioned. So Joseph Stalin, he was from 1922 until his death, he ruled with an iron fist. He ruled the Soviet Union, and he also led the Soviet Union in the Second World War. So he was kind of a symbol of Soviet Union during the Cold War, during most part of the during the initial years of the Cold War, but during most part of the Soviet Union since its establishment up till 1953. So he was leading the Soviet Union, and he had played a very vital role in the defeat of the Nazi Germany. So that was why he was given importance by the world leaders, since he had played a phenomenal role in the defeat of the Soviet Union. Then Truman, he was the 33rd President of the United States of America, and he adopted a very aggressive posture towards the Soviet Union, because he did not consider the Soviet expansion something good for the capitalist world. So that was why he adopted this posture towards the Soviet Union. So these are also some of the causes that these leaders, they had their own personalities and their own ideas about each other, and that was also one of the causes of the Cold War. Then he wanted to help the war-ridden or the conflict-ridden Europe, but he was also wary of the Soviet expansion, because he did not consider this expansion good for the construction of the European nations. And that was why, and one more thing, that when the European nations were one by one falling into the fold of the Soviet Union, it also compelled the leadership in the United States of America. It also compelled the leadership of the United States of America, at the request of the Great Britain at that time, to give some lucrative package to the European countries. Otherwise, because of poverty and because of the aftermath of the Second World War, these countries will tilt towards the USSR, because USSR was it had an economic slogan that everyone should be given assistance by the state, and the state will take care of the needs of its people under the socialism or under communism. So it was a very attractive slogan at that time, and because of poverty, because of the aftermath of the Second World War, these countries were one by one falling into the fold of Soviet Union, and that is why that was one reason that the United States of America came up with this Marshall Plan. So it was then this Marshall Plan, I have already explained about the Marshall Plan. It was a reconstruction plan, and different countries were given different sort of economic packages. Like, all the countries were not given the same kind of economic package. If a country was agrarian, so it was given an economic package in shape of agriculture aid. And if a country was industrial country like the Italy, so it was given an economic package in such a manner that its industries were erected from scratch again. So it was given in this kind of shape, and just to keep them in the fold of the United States of America. Now, division of Germany is also very important. Division of Germany is important in a sense that since Germany was the main enemy or the main power against the allied forces or against the allied powers, so that was why when it was defeated, then it had to be divided amongst the victorious countries. So it was divided into 4 parts, 4 zones, and one zone was to be administered by the United States of America, the other zone was to be administered by Great Britain, and then another zone was to be administered by France, and the 4th zone was to be administered by the Soviet Union. And since East Germany was close to Soviet Union, was bordering the Soviet Union, so that was why this East Germany was given to Soviet Union. But then there was a problem. Berlin was situated deep in the East Germany. So Berlin was, since it was the capital of Soviet Union, so that was why Berlin was also divided into similarly 4 zones. But the rest of the 3 countries, since they were capitalist countries, the United States of America, Great Britain and France, they were capitalist countries, so that is why we do not mention it in during our talks, that even this West Germany was in itself divided by 3 zones, because they were all having the same kind of economic policies. So that is why we just simply call it West Germany, led by or administered by these 3 countries, because they were the same kind of economic models in these countries, and the other was East Germany. And since these economic models were feeling threatened by the other economic models, who was the other economic model who was ruling the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic or the USSR, so that is why this is now West Germany, and that is the East Germany, and likewise Berlin was West Berlin and East Berlin. So this story of Berlin is also very interesting, and I hope you will enjoy this story of the Berlin blockade and everything. So this Berlin blockade, when it occurred, so what happened, since it was situated deep, and there was the land, first if you are trying to provide all the supplies to the people in the West Germany, you will have to cross from East Germany into the West Germany, from West Germany into the East Germany, which was administered by the USSR, and then you will have to go travel and reach to Berlin, and in Berlin the West Berlin was then with them. So they will have to cross from the Soviet territory technically and reach again to their own territory. So it was so in order to compel them, the Soviet leadership decided, in order to compel them to give them this the whole of Berlin, it decided to blockade for the Berlin blockade. Like it stopped the entry of supplies from West Germany into West Berlin, because it had to cross from East Germany, from a lot of territory in the East Germany. So it stopped them. Then what happened, that in his eyes it could have been a very wise ploy, but it did not work. Because of what? Because this blockade was an airlift was then introduced by these 3 countries led by the United States of America, particularly because the rest of the 2 countries had been beaten badly in the Second World War, so they did not have the capacity that much. But the whole blockade, these efforts, definitely they were contributing, but it was the major contribution in that Berlin airlift was that of the United States of America. And this blockade, this airlift remained for 11 months. Like it started in June 1948 and ended in May 1949. So it remained for 11 months, and you need to keep in mind that all the supplies from fuel to food to everything, it was given, it was airlifted from West Germany to West Berlin. Flights would fly, and on daily basis there were hundreds of flights on daily basis, because you need to keep in mind that since it used to be very cold in Europe during winters, so winter was also they also experienced this winter during that blockade, and they had to even supply coal from West Germany to West Berlin through aircrafts, and then food supplies. And Christmas also came during that era, and in Christmas they even dropped gifts and toys for the kids in sorry, for the kids or the children residing in the West Berlin. From the aeroplanes they dropped these things, so that they just proved that the blockade cannot put a dent, it cannot put a dent in their intention to retain that place. So when Stalin came to know that the blockade is no more working, then he definitely lifted that blockade, and then he allowed them to, okay, you just carry on whatever you are doing with West Berlin, just do that. And in that time, Bonn was the capital of the West Germany, and Berlin was only sustained. Berlin could not be the capital of West Germany because it was under the Soviet territory, encircled by the Soviet Union from all the sides. So it couldn't remain the capital at that time, but Berlin, East Berlin, was the capital of East Germany, and Bonn was the capital of West Germany. Then when the West Berlin was, since it was economically aligned with the West Germany, so the West Germany, there was a capitalist system, and in the economic system under the socialism, it was since developing. They were experimenting a lot of things, because on paper it seems something else, but when it comes to implementation, so then we face a lot of challenges while implementing an ideology. So the Marxist ideology was good, but it was utopian. There were many challenges in order to implement that ideology, and that was why people living in East Berlin, since it was the same city, so people living in East Berlin, they started to moving to the West Berlin, because the economic opportunities were there very good in West Berlin. The wages were high in West Berlin, so people started to migrate to the West Berlin. And when the Soviet Union observed that that phenomenon is now gaining momentum, and people from East Berlin are now frequently going to West Berlin, they could definitely not go to West Germany, but Berlin was the same city, so they were moving. So the Soviet Union erected the Berlin Wall, the famous Berlin Wall. It erected that wall, and it erected it in 1961, and then it was torn apart or destroyed in 1989, and that was the end of the Cold War, 1989. Like when the Berlin Wall was removed or torn apart, so then that could be termed as the literal end of the Cold War, and then Soviet Union dissolved afterwards. But then it did not have the muscle to keep the Berlin Wall intact, and it could not keep people in cages. So that was the Berlin Wall, the famous Berlin Wall. It erected a wall inside the city, which isolated West Berlin from the East Berlin. So the wall was there, and people could not move to West Berlin. There were families separated from each other. Relatives were separated. Some relatives would be living in that part of Berlin, which would come under the administration of West Berlin, and some relatives would be living in the other part of Berlin, which would come in under the administration of the East Berlin. So these families were separated, relatives were separated, and it was a very artificial kind of division which the Soviet leadership imposed on the residents of Berlin, and it lasted for almost 28 years. So it was like this, and then this wall was torn. Then we have a division, a very famous division, and that is also very interesting, very pertinent to this topic now. We have a division of the first world, the second world, and the third world. Now why do we call it the first world, the second world, and the third world? Which are the countries which form the first world, and then which are the countries, which kind of countries are formulating the second world, and which kind of countries are formulating the third world? So USA and all the democratic bloc or the capitalist developed bloc, they were part of the first world. They would be called the first world. Then Soviet Union or USSR and its socialist bloc or its satellites like Czechoslovakia and these satellites, they were part of the second world. And then there is a third world, and this third world was the non-aligned countries, and these countries were newly liberated after the Second World War, because most of the colonial powers were the European nations. So when the whole of Europe fought together with each other, so they destroyed their capacities as well to retain their colonies, and then there were freedom movements going on, even India, Pakistan. So the Second World War played a huge role in the liberation of many countries in the third world, and those newly liberated countries and non-aligned countries, they became part of the third world, and that is why we are called the third world countries. Pakistan, India, and many African countries, they are called the third world countries because they were liberated after the Second World War. And then there is a division between even these third world countries, like a developing country and underdeveloped country. So this is a division again among these third world countries, but these are they are known as the third world countries. Now, what are the stances, or what are the language, what kind of language or selection of words the leadership of both these blocks they chose? So Harry Truman, just keep in mind his one phrase and you will come to know about his frame of mind about the communism. He said that America will contain communism everywhere, like everywhere, wherever communism is spreading, we are containing it, and communism was rapidly spreading all over the world. So that is why the theater for the Cold War is being set, right? Then Nikita Khrushchev, what is his stance? He says that history is on our side. We will bury you to the United States of America. This is what he says. The history is on our side and we will bury you. Like they are in proper confrontational mode. One is saying that we will contain the spread of communism everywhere, and the other is saying that the history is on our side and we will bury you. So what does it mean? It means that they are in confrontational mode with each other, and now the stage of the Cold War is about to be set with this mind frame. Then there were many incidents in the Cold War. During these incidents, the Cold War, the theater of Cold War, though not directly on each other's territory, but in a third country territory. So these theaters were being set and proper wars were fought. Number one, what happened? That the Chinese Revolution of 1949, it came. It was a shock for the United States of America that China was on its side in the Second World War, but after the World War, the Republic of China was overthrown, and a communist revolution took place in China as well. So it was a shock for the United States of America, and it tried to stop, but it couldn't. So communism was spreading. So the communist revolution in China occurred in 1949. So it was one thing in which the United States of America did not want, but it could not stop it. And then it got really serious about the spread again after observing the example of China. that okay, now we should stop, at least it should not spread more. China was our friend and now it is a communist country, but we should not allow other friends to become communist or be swayed by the socialist revolution or the communist revolution. Then there was a Korean War fought, since Korea was also divided between the victorious powers. So there was a Korean War. The North Korea was aligned with the North Korea was communist, and then South Korea was a capitalist and administered by the United States of America, and North was quite close with China. So then Chinese revolution. So definitely, so these North Korea was a communist, Russia communist, Soviet Union communist, China communist, North Korea communist. There is a 38 parallel. We will go into detail about it in the coming lecture. Definitely, for sure, there is. I have to cover a lot of things, and I do not have time for this lecture. Just a few more minutes, and then I'll wind this lecture up, and we will discuss these things in detail in the coming lectures. But this is just to give you a brief overview of some of the hot theaters of the Cold War. So then Vietnam War. Vietnam was again divided between, the North and the South Vietnam, and the North used to be the communists and the South used to be pro-capitalist or an ally of the United States of America. So a Vietnam War was fought. Then there was a Cuban Missile Crisis. We will go into detail about this Cuban Missile Crisis in the coming lectures or lecture, whatever it is, but I'm not sure whether I'll be able to finish it up, because this is a very cumbersome topic, very cumbersome issues are there. So I'm not sure whether I'll be able to finish it up in one more class or two more classes, I don't know. Then after the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Vietnam War, I have also discussed. Then we have seen the Afghanistan issue. This Afghanistan was the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and then there was a war of liberation fought in Afghanistan. The Mujahideen fought in the United States of America, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. They came together in order to stop Soviet Union in Afghanistan and not to allow it to reach to the warm waters, which is the Arabian Sea, because after Afghanistan it was the estimation of the leadership of these countries, the United States of America and the leadership of Pakistan, that after securing Afghanistan, Soviet Union would definitely try to spread this socialism in Pakistan and in other countries, neighboring countries of Afghanistan, and it will try to spread these kind of things. And then you need to keep in mind that it was 1979, and in 1979 there was an Islamic revolution in Iran as well. So the Shah of Iran, Reza Shah Pahlavi, who was an ally of the United States of America, he was overthrown, and Khomeini took control of the Iranian society, and it was a revolution. Though it wasn't a Marxist revolution, but since it was a revolution, so revolutions were occurring in these countries, and the United States of America was really worried about losing one ally after another ally. So that was why it also came to the fore. Pakistan had its own interest in Afghanistan. It wanted to stop the spread of or the expansion of Soviet Union over there in Afghanistan, rather than waiting for it to reach to Pakistan and then fight it. So this Afghanistan theater was also a hot theater, and it is still a conflict zone. The issues haven't been settled yet in Afghanistan, though the issue of the spread of communism has been resolved. But now Afghanistan is, terrorism emanating from there, and then the United States of America had to fight that menace over there, and now peace talks are going on. So these are, you can say that the Cold War, the reflection of Cold War, or the shadows of Cold War are still there. The after effects of the Cold War are still there on the world, in shape of countries like Afghanistan, conflict-ridden countries like Afghanistan. Then a very interesting thing again happened, which was unfortunate but interesting as well. and that was the debacle of East Pakistan, Bangladesh. It became Bangladesh. That was also during the Cold War in 1971, and the hand of the Soviet spy agency was there. It was supporting Mukti Bahini, a rebel group in Bangladesh. They call it, and Indians call it, liberation war, a war of liberation, but it was a rebellion for Pakistan, and they instigated that rebellion. The Indians instigated that rebellion in Bangladesh, in East Pakistan. Then it became Bangladesh, and Soviet Union properly supported it. Pakistan was an ally of the United States of America at that time, but the United States of America did not come to the rescue of Pakistan the way it was supposed to come, and it only issued statements in favor of Pakistan, and then it said that okay, we would have to come for your rescue if there is a threat, an existential threat for Pakistan from some communist country. And since India is not a communist country, and that is why we are not bound to proactively support you. So it was like this, and I think we should stop this lecture over here. From this point onward, events, all these events which I have discussed, we will try to ponder over these events either in one more lecture or in two more lectures, and then when you watch these two or three videos, and then when you watch the new Cold War series which I have made in Urdu, when you watch that series afterwards, so you will have a fairly good idea about the international politics back then and now. So thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video, inshallah. Up till then, take care. Allah Hafiz.